Many moons back, it used to be a ritual with my dad and I that we would go camping at Lake Winnipeg during the summer months, at least. During our time there, traveling around there, and traveling to and from, we saw all sorts of crazy stuff that you would never see just traversing out by yourselves. The beautiful wild that you can see up in Canada is just unmatched by anything else. While I have seen my fair share of wildlife and crazy things I can talk about, aggressively chasing off cars in a parking lot, and even stumbling across a mother grizzly bear and her 3 cubs, I've also seen things that I can't explain with any reasoning or logic, no matter how much I try and think about them or debate them with facts. According to science, things that my father and I saw just shouldn't plainly exist. Simple as that. My father and I have both seen our fair share of UFOs, together mainly. And in fact, the entire northern Canada region is littered with them, constantly. So again, I'm not a stranger to witnessing things that shouldn't exist per se. But the sighting I'm going to share with you, I really have no words or explanation for. And maybe you do. We were on the northern bank, watching the lake, when about 50 to 70 yards away, this tall, black, canid humanoid figure. It feels so weird saying that, but that's the only description I have for you. Comes walking out of the forest, walking at a standard pace, and just continues walking straight into the water until this thing was fully submerged. We didn't see any bubbles, we didn't even see it flinch or any sort of extra movement as soon as it went into the water. It's literally like it just walked headfirst into the water with no questions asked. I can't remember the film, but it reminded me of a scene in a movie where a dad is set to drown himself, and so he just casually walks into a pond just like that until his head is fully submerged and he drowns. Except this was similar and not quite the same thing. My dad and I are both in shock and look at each other, and we both yell at each other. "Did you just see that? What was that thing?" While we got a good look at it from far away, we couldn't see the crucial details because of how far it was away. But this thing didn't seem to notice us, as far as we can tell. It never once glanced over in our direction, or in any of its directions to be exact. And once it fully submerged into the water, we saw no signs that it was still alive, no air bubbles, and it certainly did not resubmerge anytime soon. Because the area of the bank we were on, there's really nowhere it could have resurfaced without us seeing it, and it didn't. So not only were my father and I weirded out by what we saw, but we couldn't even fathom what it is that we saw. After we see it submerge, I'm scanning where it went in, I'm scanning the bank, and my father is scanning out in the lake to see if he could see it swimming, and we couldn't. It's almost as if this thing, whatever it was that fully walked in and submerged itself, was just walking casually, strolling along the bottom of the lake. What we saw was a tall, black figure, and it looked to be like it kind of had a dog head. It was pitch black, but we saw 2 large pointed ears and a snout. The body that the head was on looked just like a man, to the T. A relatively lean man, no doubt, that was muscly, but human legs, human arms, didn't see any claws or anything weird, nothing disproportionate. It's as if somebody took a dog head and stuck it right on a human body. And even though this figure was an estimated 50 to 70 yards away, it was pitch black. We couldn't see any details of this thing that would allow us to better identify what it is that we saw. Was it an animal? Or was it a person? Or was this a thing? My father is pretty convinced that it is some form of an alien, since we've seen so many UFO sightings and just weird shapes and figures in the sky. His take on it is that there is such a thing as humanoid canid aliens, and that's exactly what we saw. And the reason it was walking under the water was to walk to its ship that is also submerged under the water. And the reason it could submerge fully without having to breathe is because it's clearly an alien life form. It can traverse our time and space like no other, which means materialism isn't a thing. With how far out there my dad can get, I can't argue. I mean, he does make a good point. Personally, I don't believe it was an alien, but I don't have an explanation at all for what happened, what we saw, or why it did what it did, or why we continue to see all the lights and strange things in the sky that we do every time we're up here in the northern Canada area. It seems like the more desolate wilderness you get into, the more strange things happen. I don't know if those two things have any correlation with each other. I've had some really close friends of mine tell me some hair-raising, strange things that they've experienced themselves out in the northern regions of the wilderness in Canada. But nothing as specific as this. It was more just hearing weird sounds, like howling noises, and other strange things that they couldn't attribute it to a specific animal. I don't claim to know all the answers because, frankly, I don't have any answers. The only thing I have is a sighting that I can't quite explain. In hopes of sharing this with you, maybe you can give me some answers and hopefully shed some light onto what me and my father saw that day. Was it an alien, or was it something else? There's certain places when you're traveling that you pass through that you just think to yourself, I will never come back here ever again. The first place off the top of my mind is Bear Creek, Montana. That place is somewhere I will never come back to. So the population is literally like 50 or 60 people. It's tiny, and there's practically nobody in Montana as it is, so the population count really shouldn't come off as a surprise. But that's not why I'm telling you I will never come back there. That whole place is just creepy. Geographically, there is canyons all around that little tiny town, if you want to call it that. My girlfriend and I, on a crossroad trip, spent about half the day, or maybe it was more like an entire day, driving through this whole area of Montana. Again, filled with canyons, but what we heard was more so right around this area. It was either right before or right after, since I don't exactly remember the city limits. I would like to think these howls, or whatever you want to call them, came from the canyon nearby, but we can't be certain, because it's hard to tell with the way sound travels. My girlfriend and I heard the most aggressive screaming that we've ever heard. It sounded like it came from something not human. It almost sounded like a monster, a howl between a wolf and some sort of beast. Montana is already pretty much cowboy country and fairly desolate, so something like this wouldn't surprise me all too much if monsters were real and they decided to live around these areas. The noises we were hearing terrified us inside our tiny car with the windows rolled down and the radio playing softly in the background. At one point or another, we pulled over and just quietly listened to the outside. And the roaring, I guess you would call it, still continued on for minutes afterwards. It wasn't one long continuous growl or scream. It was a segment of screams. They didn't have any sort of pattern to them, like you would think. So no, it wasn't a form of communication. It was just random howling and screaming. If I could give you the best description I can, take when a mountain lion screams, like when they make that sound like a woman being murdered, and then combine that with a wolf howl, and then somebody angrily screaming. Combine those three things, distort it just a little bit, like some of those old AM radios, how they have a little bit of that crackle and distortion, and then put that through a mega speaker at an insane dB volume. That's not exactly what we heard, but in my mind, that comes pretty close to what it was. It scared my girlfriend and I pretty bad. Whatever was making that noise had to be a huge monster. Assuming it was a monster, I don't know any animal in the North American wilderness that makes that kind of cry, or is that loud. Bears don't scream like that. Mountain lion don't even scream like that. And they don't sound like that. Which leaves the only other predator, a wolf. And a wolf doesn't sound anything like that. And again, none of those three animals even make a sound that loud, let alone sounding exactly like that. Because my girlfriend and I sat there in the car, debating and crossing off the list what it could be and what it couldn't be, and we both came to the same conclusion. There is no known animal that we are aware of that makes a sound that exactly matched what we heard. For the rest of the state of Montana, it was beautiful, and we saw a lot of amazing sights, like tons of wild horses and just, they don't call it the big sky country for no reason. But there is just something genuinely messed up about that region of Montana that we will never travel through again.